All right, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you, everyone, for being here today with us. I'm thrilled to introduce Chad Washburn for our next Tech Talk from the Caribbean and Central American region. Thank you for joining us. We are the Caribbean and Central American Botanic Garden Network. We're based here out of Naples, Florida, and we work and operate for the Caribbean and Central America region. So my name is Lena Ramirez. I am the coordinator of the network. And I'm really happy to join you to have Chad Washburn, Vice President of Conservation for the Naples Botanical Garden, join us. But before we get started, I wanted to just go over some ground rules. Please make sure that your mics are muted and that you're not speaking during Chad's presentation. There will be time at the end for questions and answers, and I'll let you know when that time starts. So now that we've got that covered, I also wanted to make sure that anyone that needs it knows that live interpretation in Spanish is available. Para los que necesiten, tenemos traductor en español. Pueden seguir estas instrucciones acá para llegar al cuarto apropiado para que puedan escuchar todo en español. Okay. All right, so with that, let me introduce you to Chad Washburn. He's got extensive experience in developing and implementing conservation strategies and has led very successful, impactful projects across South Florida and the Caribbean, focused on conservation, horticulture, and restoration. And Chad, I forgot to mention this, but because we have a live translator, because I just caught myself speaking really quickly. And so today, our presentation will highlight insights on nature-based solutions and how the Naples Botanical Garden leverages native plants to address critical challenges in our region, from urban resilience to biodiversity conservation. The projects that Chad will describe today really showcase prime examples that work towards targets 7 and 13 of the Caribbean Strategy for Plant Conservation. If you would like to get a copy of that conservation plan, please let me know and I will send that to you. And Chad will go a little bit deeper in this in his presentation. So with that, please join me in welcoming Chad Washburn.
Right. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Lena, for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Lena said, I'm Chad Washburn. I'm the Vice President of Conservation at Naples Botanical Garden. So let's see. Is everything working well with my screen and audio? All right, let's do it. So we're currently 4 years into the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration, which exclaims that this is our moment, and it truly is our moment, especially as botanic gardens. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration aims to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems on every continent and in every ocean. And there's never been a more urgent need to revive damaged ecosystems than right now in this moment. Just this last month, at COP16 in October of 2024, last month, countries from around the globe gathered in Colombia and committed to Target 2 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And that target ensures that by 2030, at least 30% of areas of degraded ecosystems across all ecosystem types, that's upland and aquatic systems, will be under effective restoration. This global target not only enhances ecosystem functions and services, it stems the rapid loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing and supports the Paris Climate Agreement. And in 2022, the Plant Conservation Strategy for the Caribbean region was approved at the 3rd Botanical Bridges Congress hosted at the Leon Levy Native Plant Preserve in the Bahamas. And that strategy includes targets for both the restoration of critically endangered species, as Lena mentioned, but also the development of region-wide and national programs for the restoration and rehabilitation of ecosystems with appropriate native plant species to support both plant conservation and carbon sequestration. So today we're going to focus both on ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions. And that second part, nature-based solutions, may be a newer term to some of you. How are these similar and how are they different? Both can work to conserve intact ecosystems. That's a function of both. And they both can assist in the recovery of destroyed or degraded ecosystems. But where restoration often puts more emphasis on environmental function, nature-based solutions add components of economic and social benefits to the restoration of that ecosystem. Some examples of nature-based solutions include stormwater parks or floodable parks. These are parks that can be designed for day-to-day public use, but they're also able to absorb tidal or storm surge flooding or storm flooding, excuse me, and improve water quality. Also living shorelines, and that living shorelines often include both engineering and nature-based solutions that reduce wave energy and reduce erosion and can help to really protect our coastal infrastructure. Coral reefs and mangroves, which also help to reduce coastal erosion and support recreational and subsistence fishing. Wetlands, rain gardens, and stormwater systems, which can be designed to reduce flooding and reduce algal blooms from nutrient pollutants. Another great example are green roofs, which can help to reduce heat impacts in urban areas. And they can provide islands for pollinators and birds and other wildlife within our cities. Another great example is climate-ready urban forests, which can be designed to not only reduce the significant heat island issues that we face in our urban areas now as temperatures climb, they can also create an urban forest that is adapted to the impacts of climate change. So the impacts of climate change are less on our urban ecosystems. Another final great example, and these are just some of many, are green corridors. Like our colleagues, if you saw the presentation from OSA Conservation in OSA, Costa Rica, a green corridor like this can provide significant recreation opportunities, but it also provides opportunities for species of plants, animals, and insects to migrate across the landscape in the face of climate change. So what do all of these projects have in common? Plants. Plants are the primary producers in ecosystems, and they lie at the heart of both restoration and nature-based solutions. So understanding how their individual function contributes to the overall ecosystem function is critical to getting both restoration and nature-based solutions right. So what do botanic gardens have to do with these two topics, restoration and nature-based solutions? Well, they're currently, BGCI notes that there are currently over 1,775 botanic gardens around the world, and that's from 148 different countries. We are everywhere. And gardens are great centers of plant knowledge and expertise. And I won't read it to you, but if you look at the screen, I've included just some of the disciplines that are found in a botanic garden. If you work at a botanical garden, no matter the size, the age, or capacity of your garden, you likely have experts in one or more of these fields. Gardens also have significant plant collections, and that means that we have access to plants for restoration and research. So just last week at this time, I was giving this presentation to the Society for Ecological Restoration's North American Conference, and I shared a great website that if you don't use, I highly recommend. It's BGCI, Botanical Gardens Conservation International's Plant Search. I shared that with the audience, and many didn't realize that botanical gardens hold some of the key species that are necessary for restoration and nature-based solutions. We can support those, and we have great potential with those plant collections, both in living collections and in our seed bank. Gardens are also typically seen as a neutral party and a trusted scientific authority in their region among both the public and, most importantly, those decision makers. And perhaps the biggest thing is audience. Most importantly, gardens around the world receive more than 500 million visitors worldwide. That represents incredible opportunities for education about our work and advocacy about our work in ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions. So from here, I'd like to focus on just one case study in restoration and nature-based solutions from my home garden, Naples Botanical Garden in Naples, Florida. And we're located under that giant hurricane. We're the red star there. Um, as you may have heard, you may or may not have heard, here in South Florida, and across the Caribbean, we're facing some unprecedented impacts from hurricanes. This image is from September of 2022, and this is Hurricane Ian striking our state. This storm set a depressing number of records, and I won't go into that for you. But one of the impacts of this storm included storm surge that was as high as 4.2 meters or 15 feet, and even higher in some places. The impact of that storm surge and that ebb flow back out to the Gulf overwhelmed our coast and eroded nearly all of the beach dune ecosystems across the region. And then just before this presentation, we in South Florida, along with many other the areas in the region, were impacted by two hurricanes, Hurricane Helene and Milton, just last month. These back-to-back storms brought additional storm surge and impacts to our coast, and they further eroded these beach dune ecosystems to a point where natural recovery would take decades or longer, and it's really not an option for us. In many areas along our urban interface, there is no native beach dune vegetation left, or just a few individual species of just a few plants. And this problem of storm surge and hurricanes is exacerbated by sea level rise. Across the American South and in the Caribbean region, we're facing some of the highest rates of sea level rise globally. Just this year, you may have heard scientists at Fairchild Garden in Miami, were one of the cacti that they work with was the first plant extirpated from the U.S. due to sea level rise, and that's the Key Largo tree cactus. So you can see restoring this ecosystem would bring some environmental resiliency to our coast, but it would also have this ecosystem also has significant economic and social implications for our community. I like to joke that mangroves have the best public relations firm on earth. You can go anywhere and ask people what mangroves do. They protect our coast. Everyone seems to know their role. However, beach dunes play a vital role in protecting some of our most vital infrastructure. They act as a barrier between the Gulf waters and nearly all of our developed urban areas, our hospitals, our churches, our businesses, our homes and schools. Beaches really separate us from the Gulf, and that's that protected barrier. A healthy and biodiverse beach dune can recover quickly after impacts to that storm. It has the species diversity that allows it to recover quickly, and we can open our beaches again. Our tourism-based economy can continue to thrive and open quickly. Our coastline in our region across Southwest Florida includes over 300 kilometers of beaches and dunes, and it really is the economic engine of our region. Without it, most of our community does not exist, and I know our botanical garden would not exist. So it's obvious that this ecosystem is vital not only to our economy, our environment, and our community, and those are those three legs of nature-based solutions. We found that restoring it, however, we face significant barriers. We can't truly restore this ecosystem so that it can provide those economic, environmental, and social functions that it provides. This is a clipping from a news story. In 2023, just last year, our county, Collier County, spent $24 million to build an emergency sand berm. And here's what that looks like. This really is not just what you want to see over and over again in the area that's the most important economic engine of your region. You don't want to see people in bikinis and bathing suits sitting next to heavy machinery driving up and down the beach, delivering this sand for this emergency berm. So our community in Southwest Florida has been addressing coastal resiliency in this way for a number of years. In fact, since 1996 in our county, just Collier County alone, we have 20 miles or 30 kilometers of beaches. We've renourished our beaches with just over 4.2 million cubic yards of sand. And that sand is either mined from inland or pumped in from the Gulf. If you can imagine the impact of mining that sand, and driving it across the state to dump on our beaches, or sucking it up from benthic substrates in the Gulf and pumping it inland. That environmental impact alone is huge. If we were to truck all that sand in, which much of it was trucked in, that's 262,000 dump trucks worth of sand, just like this truck here you see on the screen, dumping sand on our beach alone. That's just since 1996. And almost none of this work included restoring the dunes plant community, that all important plant community that provides function. So when we did do plantings along the beach as a community, nearly all of those plantings consisted of just one, two, and sometimes three species. And two of the primary ones are sea oats, or Uniola paniculata, which you see here, and sometimes sea grape, Coccoloba uvifera. But we know as plant people that a healthy and resilient beach dune, like pretty much any ecosystem, relies on plant diversity to be able to function properly. And this practice of restoring an ecosystem with just one or two species really limits our dune's ability to not only protect our coast, it limits its ability to recover quickly after a storm. The lack of species diversity in beach dune restoration plantings is often due to a couple reasons. It's not necessarily something we do on purpose. We're relying on what we've done in the past. We've always just planted sea oats, and we know that they'll grow, but we miss out on all the function of all of those other species in an ecosystem. And even if we do hope to include a full complement of native species in our beach dune restorations, up until now, very little of those species have ever been available for use. In our county alone, currently more than 40% of the species that should be included in beach dune restoration in our coast have never ever been available in the nursery trade in any quantities. And additionally, 80%, nearly 80% of the plant species that we do need to plant in these restoration and nature-based solution projects across our coast are not available in sufficient quantities or quality for restoration. And that may mean that they were collected somewhere in a different state and brought in. So they're not ecologically adapted to our Southwest Florida coast. And this lack of appropriate native plant diversity to restore ecosystems isn't just an issue we face here on the Southwest Florida coast. It's really a critical global issue. If you haven't seen this report was for the US. However, I would say that it applies globally. In 2023, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report that found across the US, native seeds and native plants are urgently needed to restore ecosystems that have been impaired by extreme weather, wildfires, flooding, and other disasters. So even if we in South Florida wanted to restore resiliency to our coastline, we face significant challenges in making it a reality. There really is no way without that appropriate plant material that we can appropriately restore this vital ecosystem that our entire community and everyone in it depends upon. So we're up against a huge challenge. How do we urgently, and I mean very urgently, we're facing another storm in the Gulf, right now in the Caribbean region. How do we urgently prepare for effective landscape scale, large scale restoration of that nearly 300 kilometers of beach dune ecosystems in the face of climate change and continuing impacts? How do we effectively restore this ecosystem and both the social, economic, and environmental benefits that it provides to us? How do we do that when no pipeline of appropriate plants exists? And both reference and collection sites are all significantly impacted. Even protected natural areas where we have a lot of plant diversity, those have been significantly impacted by storms. So it's getting harder and harder to collect material. How do we scale up from almost nothing to numbers in the plant numbers in the millions to be able to complete this vital restoration project? So where do you start? I'm going to share this as a case study in how we did it in Naples and in South Florida. And hopefully there are some parallels that you can take back to your region to identify What are the restoration and nature-based solutions projects that you and your garden can be involved in and lead and support? So one of the first steps that we take is we identify the workhorse species that are needed in beach dune restoration projects. If you spend any time in the field at all, this is something I encourage you to consider as you take notes. In addition to collecting not only botanical data on plants, I encourage you to make notes on their function. Are they providing shade, attracting pollinators, stabilizing soils? Are they recovering quickly after a disturbance? Make those notes because you never know when those plants and that entire ecosystem can be broadly impacted by disaster. Here in Southwest Florida, there are over 80 species of native dune plants across our region. And we have limited time and resources, like most gardens around the world. We have limited time and resources to identify those that are the key functioning plants in ecosystems for ecosystem restoration. So we began doing this work in the spring of 2019 out of a concern for our coastal community's future. So in doing this, we don't do it alone. We partner with scientists from Florida Gulf Coast University's Water School and natural resource managers from Rookery Bay. And shout out, I know some of them are on this call right now. We couldn't do that without our partners. We work to identify the important plant species and determine their function in beach dune formation, in colonization of the dunes, and recovery of after storms. And then we map their locations on the coast. Are they more on the water edge, on the back dune, in the swales? Where are they located? One example, when we talk about noting the function of plants, you can see that here. This is during storms. This is where a storm, this was an unnamed, just afternoon tropical storm, where waves and storm surge just from waves and high tide eroded sand from the dunes and redeposited it offshore or sometimes inland on the dunes. You can see this here. This is a great example of this was done naturally, but with plants in place, they helped to hold the sand against erosion. We would have lost much more sand if we did not have plants in place. So this dune, it's located in Captiva Island, was eroded, but it protected the inland community. And since it still has plants present, it'll be able to recover quickly after the storm. And that means that beach not only protected the community, it also allows that beach to open quickly and maintain some of that sand so we can get back to our thriving beach and beach dune economy. We also found that we thought erosion was one of the main factors that we had to protect against, but we also found that dunes can be overwhelmed by sand washed ashore during hurricanes. And you can see this is all sand that was deposited on top of the beach dune during a hurricane. And this was before the two recent hurricanes last month. This location is at Lover's Key in South Florida, and several feet, you can see, of sand were deposited right on top of beach dune vegetation during a storm. And nearly all of the grasses and broad-leaved herbaceous plants didn't survive this much sand being deposited, washed on top of those plants. However, you can see there's still a diversity of woody plant species that were able to push up through that sand and recover. So these differing responses of plants to damage from storm and ability to survive after storms really underlines the importance of including a diversity of species in beach dune restoration, not just 2 or 3 species. We need a full complement of those workhorse species in ecosystem restoration and in nature-based solutions. So we rely on species diversity for these functions. So just to focus a little bit more zoomed in, I want to focus on just a couple individual single species. I want to highlight this one. This is C. purslane. And we found that this plant is a great pioneer plant, meaning it's one of the first species we find in the natural processes of building a new dune. And where small pieces of this plant take hold, it stabilizes the beach. And you can see a small piece here stabilized, it grew into a plant, and it's trapping sand. It's built a small natural dune there. And as it does this, it helps to also trap other windblown seeds as they blow down the beach. And we think that these can function as becoming a nursery for an entire ecosystem. Another good example of that is this location, and this is on Cayo Costa. This is another outer lying island off of the coast of Florida. And here you can see sea purslane. You can also see another species, seashore paspalum. It's another pioneer plant. And they grew across a large area that was once an inlet. Just a year before this picture was taken, this was an inlet. Water flowed in and out through this location. But in just under a year, these two plants formed a functioning dune ecosystem. So we've monitored this location over time. Unfortunately, we have not been able to go out back to this site because it's closed because of impacts from the hurricane. It's a part of a state park. We found that other beach dune plants perform different functions in the ecosystem. This one, for example, it's a beautiful blue color. This is bitter pennant grass. It's typically found in a more mature, established beach dune plant community, and it functions much in the way that sea oats do. And it can be found in similar areas as sea oats. And it's not a plant that recovers quickly or colonizes after a storm like the pioneer species do, but it's a large plant that has a deep root system. It helps to hold and trap sand in place and stabilize the dunes, making them more resistant to damage from storms. I mentioned as you go out into the field, taking notes on the functions of plants. What are these plants doing as you're on the field, noting that? In order to restore resiliency to our beaches, we also have to identify how a species recovers after a disturbance. So if you have a disturbance, that's a great opportunity as scientists to take notes, and educators and botanical garden ecologists. I encourage you to do this as you go out in the field. After every storm, the first thing we do is we're out there on the beaches right away, usually the day after a storm. This is an example of a plant, beach elder, and this was just a couple days. It's a woody shrub. This was just a couple days after storm surge from Hurricane Ian. And you can see it started to regrow really quickly. It survived. Note the location of this plant. You can see a signpost in the middle of it. I'm going to show you another photo of this plant just a few months later. This is what that plant looked like. It regrew really quickly and expanded in area, and it trapped about 12 inches of sand. Remember, our county just spent $24 million to bring sand to this beach. So trapping it and holding it in place and stabilizing that is really vital. It helps to protect that $24 million investment. This is another example of that plant. Since then, we've found that it plays a significant role in building dunes. This was after Hurricane Idalia, which was not really, for us, there was not a lot of wave energy. It was primarily a wind hurricane impact in our region. But this one individual plant trapped over 2 feet of sand, building a berm, and it'll recover very quickly after this. So plants are vital to ensuring that we trap and keep that sand on our coast. Another great example, and this is another favorite of many of us, is railroad vine. It's a really important species in dune formation and dune recovery. And this was this is 24 hours after a hurricane. Hurricane Idalia passed nearby Southwest Florida on August 29th of this year, and this photo shows a patch of railroad vine that was buried by just a few inches. You can still see a few dead leaves. It was buried by sand during that storm, just 24 hours after the event. This is 15 days later. This is what this area looked like. This is literally just 15 days after that hurricane struck. This plant has begun to recover. This is 30 days later after the storm. This plant has not only almost completely recovered, if you look in the center, you can see these 2 purple flowers. This plant is starting to flower 30 days after the storm, which means it's producing seeds that can go into the seed bank for the future. So this plant is really plays a vital role in beach dune resiliency. But best part about this is 7 months later, we went back out to the site. And this is our colleague, Lena Ramirez, our host for today, and Rodrigo de Souza from the Osa Conservation in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica. Visited the site, and you can see they're about the same height when they stand back to back. But this one individual plant trapped about 2 feet of sand across a large area. So it plays a vital role in keeping that sand in place. So we've learned as much as we could about these plants, and that's really the first step. We identify their function. We identify their response to disturbance. We identify those workhorse species that need to be included. So we can't include all 80 species. We identify those important ones. The next step, we needed to do a trial planting on the beach to really put what we learned to the test. So with approval from the city of Naples, and in fact, the gentleman in the blue shirt in the middle, that's our vice mayor. He came out and we actually got him to plant plants. We trialed a pilot planting of diverse beach dune species at 3 locations along our beach. And less than 1 year after this restoration planting occurred, we were hit by Hurricane Ian. And I'm happy to say that our diverse test plots not only survived this storm and the 15 feet of storm surge that we got across the region, they began to recover quickly after the hurricane. Just days after the storm, these plants began to stabilize sand and began rebuilding those dunes. So one of the biggest hurdles to this project, in addition to the availability of plants, was convincing our local leaders and our community members that we need to change the way we restore our coasts. We know this. We know that plants have this function, but we needed to show them. So the outcomes of this planting, coupled with a really robust community education program, were really the driving forces in ensuring that successful change. Educators from the garden did programs not only in our botanical garden on the importance of this ecosystem and the importance of plants and restoration in this ecosystem, they also took this message to the audiences at the beach, and they're continuing to do this. So as visitors come to the beach and often just walk through this ecosystem, they're being engaged to understand why it's important, to understand that this is really a vital part of our ability to go to the beach and our community, our ecosystem, our economy. Finally, going back to that National Academies assessment that identified the lack of suitable native plant material for restoration, we needed to find a way to make that diversity of native dune plants available quickly and in large numbers. For many of you, this may be the biggest hurdle to ecosystem restoration or nature-based solutions in your region. So we needed to collect seeds and small cuttings of these species that we identified as playing an important role in beach dune ecosystems. We needed to learn how to grow them. And then we needed to scale that up into the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of plants. And keep in mind, many of these species have never been grown in a commercial nursery to any scale at all. So we had to unlock the best way to collect small numbers of propagules and successfully grow them into large number of plants. This was a huge challenge, but this is a challenge that botanical gardens are uniquely suited to address. So we started these collections in earnest about 2 years ago, which was fortuitous because our collection sites have now been impacted with this. We work really closely with our collaborators in Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, and without them, we really would not be able to do this. But that impact scaled up across our coast really impacts every single person who lives or visits our community along Southwest Florida. And while doing this, we follow the Center for Plant Conservation's collection protocols to make sure that we not only we minimize the impacts to the ecosystems where we're collecting, we also capture enough genetic diversity so that we have genetic diversity within our restoration plants. Once we collect these seeds or cuttings and figure out the best way to grow them, We take them to our garden's bulking nursery. This is a collection which we call the foundational collection. You can see it wrote out here on your screen. We have about 18 species of workhorse beach dune plants that are necessary for restoration. And they're planted in rows like this, where we can either collect more seed, we can bulk seed, or we can collect cuttings. And from that foundational collection, we can bulk up to produce hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of seeds and cuttings. And those then go on to a commercial nursery where they can be grown into plants for large-scale coastal restoration. For us in South Florida, this was our best option. But other options that you may identify in your area and your own home garden include working with farmers. That's something that the OSA conservation team does in Costa Rica. Working with smaller commercial or home nurseries, working with entrepreneurs, working with community stakeholders, working with homeowners to help grow plants for restoration. Quite often, communities will take on adopt projects as their own and take ownership for them. So as a botanical garden, we've been able to rely on the expertise of all of those specialists and their knowledge of plants and ecosystems to do this work. We've been able to do something that's never been done before. For the first time ever, many of these species have been made available for effective beach dune restoration. And going back to that UN decade on restoration, we can confidently say that botanical gardens, this is our moment. So where do we go from here? Just a couple of quick updates. Currently, our county is set to plant nearly 13 miles of beaches along our coast with just over 1 million plants. And I'm happy to say that they're set on doing it right. They've included a diversity of 16 species of locally collected native dune plants, and they're now available for the first time for landscape scale restoration. And as we do this, we'll move on up our coast into the counties north of us to make this plant material available for effective restoration there. There's nearly 300 kilometers of beaches just in Southwest Florida's coast alone, and nearly all of that is in need of some sort of intervention. So great opportunity for us to scale this project up our entire coast. So as I end today, I'd like to thank our partners in this work, and they truly make all of this work possible. And I'd also just in the face of this, I'd like to express my concerns and send our thoughts out to our colleagues in central Cuba and the Cayman Islands this week as they face impacts from Hurricane Rafael in the next couple of days. And then before we get to a question and answer session, I'd like to pose a question to you as our audience today. I'd like to find out how many of you are involved in ecosystem restoration or nature-based solutions. If this is work that you do, please leave a comment in the chat telling the ecosystem or the nature-based solution that you work in, and then give a yes or a no if you face the challenge of the availability of native plant species as a significant challenge to your work. So with that, I will stop and I think we'll open up for questions. Please make sure and make those comments in the chat, and we'll use that as kind of a needs assessment or taking the temperature to find out where we are across the region. Thank you.
All right. Well, so far we've got one question in the chat from Michael Sipos. Would you like me to read it, or do you want me to just have Michael ask his question?
Let's see. If the question is in English, so if Mariana could read the question to our Spanish audience, and I will read it to our English audience. I was wondering if there were, this is from Michael Sipos. I was wondering if there were any specific short fact sheet publications for coastal homeowners and their landscapers on dune restoration or maintenance one could do without a permit, and other good information like recommended time of the year. He's been asked this question before, and he's outlined some links, but many of the resources, there's really not a lot of good resources for this. Right now, there's not, and we're working on this as a botanical garden with our colleagues from Florida Gulf Coast University. And Michael, I know you've got some great resources. I'd like to reach out to you as well as one of our good partners. This is something that we're working on. This has been an emergency response. Really, we've been able to scale up these plants to the numbers in the potentially millions. But our next steps are providing education and opportunities for homeowners and how to do this work, for landscapers, for the professional community. So watch this space. Michael, I'll reach out to you after this conversation. The garden has some great resources. And if you scan the QR code on our screen, a lot of information is available there.
Chad, could
Yeah.
you actually share for the QR code, if you could share your screen
Yeah. All
again?
right, let me go back to that. There we go. Is that QR code pop up on the screen? All right, I'll leave that there for a minute if anybody wants to screenshot that or use your devices to link to the garden's web pages.
Thank you so
All right.
much, Chad. Do we have any other questions? Please feel free to add them into our chat. Okay, we have one from Daniela. Oh, okay, we're getting a few now. Okay, let's see. Oh, Christian, I see yours popped up first. Do you apply fertilizer, organic or inorganic, and install irrigation on those plantings?
Great question. And thank you, Mariana, for repeating that question to our audience in Spanish as well. Right now, we're testing this right now. The requirements from the engineers require fertilizers on the plantings, but we have a lot of questions. Do fertilizers facilitate competition, or do they facilitate they may end up making one plant more competitive than another, and changing that ecosystem. This is really a nutrient poor ecosystem, so we think that we can establish these well without fertilizer, and avoid those potential competition among some of these native species. As far as irrigation goes, some homeowners have installed irrigation. Right now, when we dig down, we plant these about 6 inches deep. Normally, when you plant a plant, you don't plant the top of the soil level 6 inches deep. Beech dune plants actually, that invigorates them. And when we do that, they're down closer to the water table. So no, we do not irrigate these plantings.
All right, we have a question from Daniela in Costa Rica. I work in the cloud forest ecosystem in Monteverde, Costa Rica. We focus on rare and endangered native species of trees. Our main challenge is successfully germinating seeds. I'm sorry, that was an answer to your poll.
Okay, and Daniela, I just to comment on that, absolutely. That's one of the biggest challenges. Many of the plants that we're working with have never been grown. And that's where botanical gardens really are uniquely suited for this work. And as gardens, this is information we need to share. You're probably working with plant families or genera or even species that others in the region are working with. And while it may not be the same species, they may have some information that could help you unlock how to grow that plant.
Have a question. I want to think that this is Colin in the viewing room here at the garden. How straightforward was it to engage with the local nurseries in South Florida to adopt the challenge of scaling up the multiplication of the palette of native species you identified, and do they consider this as a viable option?
Great question. So we had a really good opportunity to work with a large scale nursery to very quickly make these plants available. But what I would really like to do is take that and start to work. This is not something that one nursery can handle. It was a great opportunity for us to scale up very quickly, but this is a huge and urgent need. And by creating an economy to create several nurseries who can do this work to scale this up, that's everything from small local family farmers and small nurseries up to large scale. We all need to be involved in this. Um, Thankfully, our nursery partner jumped onto this very quickly. The leader of the nursery, one of the leaders, spends a lot of time. The two leaders spend a lot of time on the beaches, and they saw the need for this. So for us, it was a very easy lift, but they see this now as a great opportunity to build an economy around not only native plants for landscaping, but native plants for restoration, where we need species diversity and genetic diversity. So.
Okay, our next question is, are these nurseries now continuing to produce these species as a regular part of their business?
Yeah, so the first planting, the first opportunity to grow these plants for the large scale restoration was kind of a test. And unfortunately, we had to test in a big way, which can be a little bit scary. We did our pilot plantings in a very small way. We wanted to show that this could be successful. We had to do this in a big way, but it's been wildly successful. That need is expanding and growing. And we've talked to some of the larger commercial nurseries who have said that if we all even work together, there's no way that we could produce the number of species and the number of plants that we need for mitigation, for nature-based solutions, and for restoration in South Florida. So this is definitely now becoming a regular part of our business, whether it's that nursery, that primary nursery that we work with, or our entire nursery industry in South Florida.
On that topic, we don't have any additional questions, but oh, hey Danny. I wanted to read Nick Coelho from Bermuda, his comment, which was, yes, they have challenges in Bermuda getting plant material, or they did initially. However, there's now more uptake in general public wanting these native and endemic plants, so the local nurseries have bolstered production. In addition, the Bermuda Zoological Society sources seeds themselves and then distribute them to community groups, nurseries, and private owners. So that's great to see that on other islands, especially where you have what you have on the island, more and more people are wanting to use the native and endemic plants, and that it's accessible now.
I see Jeff Talbert's comment from Atlanta Botanical Garden. Big shout out to them. They just hosted an incredible conference a couple weeks ago, the Southeastern Partners for Plant Conservation, and they're doing some incredible work. And got to see a little bit about the projects that you're doing there, Jeff, the restoration projects. So that's great.
Okay, Trevor, also from Bermuda Zoological Society, has asked, do you find difficulties reaching these communities to engage them in environmental stewardship for these programs?
Great question. I'd like to, can I put one of my colleagues on the spot? Britt Patterson-Weber, she's our Vice President of Education. Is this something, are you able to jump on and answer that? And if not, I can address it. She may not be able to join. So this is an audience that we
Hi, Chad.
Oh, hey,
Can you hear
is this Mary Helen?
Hold on, I'm passing the thing to Britt.
Okay, or Mary Helen, whoever, yeah.
I'm sitting right here. We're all we've got a watch party going on.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So if we can revisit the question, which was, do we find any challenges with engaging the public? Is that about right?
This is from Bermuda, great corporate interest and general community activism, but we're lacking interest from low-income communities. Do you find difficulties in reaching these communities to engage them in environmental stewardship for these projects?
Well, I'd say for this pilot that we've been doing for the last year with the Beach Dune education, that hasn't been a focus. In our area, the low-income communities are not typically also beachgoers. So the beach would not be in their backyard. Although I will say that our program is completely free, and that we do provide a coupon to visit the garden for anybody who attends. So really what we've been looking at for this first year, the pilot, we are doing education on site at the Botanical Garden where we bring some of our nursery plants out. And we have a program called Growing a Coastal Barricade, and we talk about our efforts and point out some of the plants that we recommend for restoration. So that's reaching our 250,000 visitors that we have a year. We have signage in the garden as well. And then we also have the program at the beach, which I mentioned was free. And then that one we also welcome to anybody who happens to be walking down the beach. So we encourage people to register in advance, but if you're at the beach, you can attend as well. So I'm not sure if that answered. Oh yeah, and we have a middle school program that was part of our plant and climate change education pilot program, which was part of the United States Botanic Garden Initiative, where we're all developing plant-centered climate change education models. Our models for middle school students at a school in a rural part of our area called Immokalee. And the student group name is called Dragon Squad, which stands for Dedicated Researchers Adventuring for Greener Outdoors Now. And they've been the beach efforts have been woven throughout their program, from visiting the beach to see the effects of the hurricane to them growing some of the beach restoration plants at in their school garden.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And Trevor, I just would like to add, it's really interesting that although the lower income community is not the community that is visiting the beach quite often, they're the ones that benefit maybe the most from this, or they benefit significantly from this because, again, our beaches are the economic engine of our region. And if we don't have that, many of the jobs around the community just would not exist. Opportunities would not exist.
We have another question from Jeff Talbert. Do you run into issues with state wildlife agencies balancing the need for proper beach nesting bird habitat and beach dune restoration?
Jeff, that's a great question. We just had a major project south of the garden where an outerlying protective island was rebuilt after storms, and that area was kept free of plants so that it was just open sand for nesting birds. And the idea was it would plants might hide predators. But that project, just shortly after it was completed, because it did not have plants, was overwashed by a storm and washed out. So there is that difficult balance, and we don't necessarily have a solution. The state wildlife agencies did not want plants planted in that area, but we know that we cannot keep those places intact without plants, and that's from those day-to-day storms. That's not necessarily the big storms. So there's a balance there, and that's something that we hope to trial a few of the smaller native pioneer plant species to try and hold some of that sand in place, but also leave open, bare areas for nesting shorebirds.
Wonderful. I think we have time for another question or two. If I missed your question, please add it once more. Oh, yes, I see the message from Colin. In one of your images, the vice mayor attended a planting session. Are you finding that policymakers are now buying into nature-based solutions?
I think in South Florida, we have the benefit. In South Florida, yes, the politicians and the decision makers are starting to support nature-based solutions. Some of this comes in the imagery that I've shown you today, when we can show the effect of this. And when we talk to, our education team, Britt and Mary Helen talked about our education programs. We also do education programs for the stakeholders, for the politicians, for the decision makers. And as a scientist, I never thought I would find myself in politicians' offices, but that's where I am a lot of now. And meeting with them and sharing these slides, the slides that I've shown today, and showing what can be done with plants and why this is vital. Quite often, the message that we take to those policymakers is not a message of the environment. The message is of the economic and social sides. That's two important components of the nature-based solutions. We talk about, if it's a politician, the people who vote for you, your constituency, they depend on these nature-based solutions for the economic needs. This supports their jobs, whether you work in a hotel or a restaurant or a police officer or no matter where you work. And that's the kind of message that really gets through to them. We don't talk about the environment as much. We shift that message. So great question. Thank you.
One more question from Danny. Any issues arising with invasives impacting coastal restoration work in Florida?
Yeah, so we do have beach Napaca. We have an invasive scavola, and we also have a vitex that we're concerned about. And there's a grass that we're starting to see, a small annual grass that we're starting to see come into these ecosystems. And when they're disturbed like this, that quite often facilitates the rapid growth of those invasive species. So in the engineering plan that for our coastline, one of the requirements is invasive species be treated initially before plantings take place, but then also that invasive species be treated throughout. And we're actually, as a community, putting a lot more effort into management of these ecosystems against invasive species. Where invasives come in, we get these monocultures of one individual, and we know that we lose all of those other functions that beach dunes provide. So great question. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I think that was perfect timing. Thank you, Chad, so much for being here with us today, for this amazing presentation, sharing your work. And thank you, everyone around Southwest Florida, up to Atlanta. I think there was past Atlanta that was present today, all throughout the Caribbean, Central America. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you have any additional questions for Chad, his email address is being shared on the screen. So please feel free to send him an email, send me an email as well if you need anything within the region. This is being recorded, so it will be available online. I will be uploading it to YouTube in the next few days. And I will send an email to all that have registered and to our networks and email lists so that it is being widely shared and you can share it out with colleagues. And I see a few messages here saying, thank you, Chad, from our participants. And that it was a great presentation. So again, thank you from all of us.
Great to see everybody. Thank you. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.